The honor and the pleasure of hearing from our colleague and dear friend Margie Rich. Margie Rich will be presenting on a work titled Beyond Perception, the Use of Color in a Visual World. A graduate of both Wharton School of Business at University of Pennsylvania and Savannah College of Art and Design, Professor Rich joined us after a successful career as an Executive Vice President of Marketing and Advertising at Sarge & Sarge. Her clients included numerous Fortune 100 companies such as Procter & Gamble and General Mills. The next installment of the SCF Faculty Lecture Series will be held in January, and Professor Jackie Smith will be presenting on an Indian captivity narrative titled A True History of the Captivity and Restoration of Mrs. Mary Rowlandson. I would also like to extend our thanks to Kim and Jessica, two members of our film club, who has graciously volunteered to film this lecture, and it will be actually placed on our library website. We hope to continue to do so in future. Thank you. Without further ado, where's Margie? Where's Margie?
So thank you so much for coming. This is really an exciting time to talk about color, and we're in a period now where color is changing, and that might sound a little counterintuitive because we've got our red, we've got our yellow, we've got our green. What can change, right? Well, it's all the things that are around the color that are changing today very rapidly. Here are some of the things that are going on. We've got a lot of new research that's being done. In fact, in the scientific and neuroscience community, also in psychology, there's a lot of interest in perception and color perception. So there are a lot of new studies out just in the past couple years that are telling us more really why we're so interested in color, why the visual world is exploding. We've got a lot of new ways to create color. That's pretty obvious with the whole digital revolution that we're in. And I think the big headline today is that as a culture, we have new chromatic thresholds. And we're going to get into those. And what I mean by that, chromatic means color. So what used to seem perfectly bright and saturated or vivid to us now might not seem so much. Maybe we're requiring a little bit more in terms of color because of our images, because of all the images that are out there. And then last but certainly not least is that there are all new fields that are emerging as a result of this explosion of color and our visual culture. And that's really good, something good that I want to collect and share with you some of the things that are going on in terms of opportunities, things you can act on. So, in a visual world, just to give you a little bit of context in terms of color is situated in the visual world, right? So, in a visual world, some of the things that are coming out. This is a recent study done in MIT in 2014. And what they found out is that to take in an image, meaning to see it, takes really a little bit more than 1/10 of a second. But to absorb an image, just to take it in, only takes 1/3 of a second. So to put that in perspective, to say a word takes 1/3 of a second, okay? So obviously, you're not going to say one word to describe something. You're going to say a sentence or a paragraph. But for a visual, you're going to understand that in a blink of an eye, really. So what that means is, if you think about our global world, images are efficient. And this is not new. We've been wired this way since the beginning. But we're beginning to understand why has this visual world exploded. And so we know now that images are efficient. It makes sense. We like images. We can read them fast and then we can move on. Further, visual world. Everybody here knows we're in a multicultural society, world, globe. Just in YouTube, statistics that just came out for this year, there's 1.3 billion users worldwide on YouTube. It's really growing. The year before that, it was 1 billion. That's a big jump. So one of the things that's driving that, fueling that, is that images don't need a translation. It's pretty, it's all starting to fit in. Why is this happening? It's not going to go away. It's going to become more intense. So images are global, which is really important to all of us. So creating and sharing images, everybody in this room knows. I'm just taking Facebook, which isn't necessarily the platform that everybody in this room is on. I know you're Snapchat and Instagram, but just to give you a Facebook statistic, 350 million images are being uploaded to Facebook daily. So this is kind of what is going on, and now you know why, because they're quick. We have the technology to do it. 85% of the people in the country have a smartphone. So the smartphone allows us to take an image, to adjust the color, to put filters on it, and so to speak, upload it, share it. So we are in the center of something that has never been seen before. And when we talk about the capability of our brain versus language, the verbal language versus the visual language, it's not going away. It's only going to get more intense. So color is situated right in the middle of an image, right? Nobody would disagree with that. But how important is color in an image? Well, what I want to talk a little bit about is the painter Mark Rothko. And he is a painter, a modernist painter from the New York school that was he started working in color in mid-century, and known also as an abstract expressionist. But his idea was he wanted to experiment with the emotional quality, spiritual quality of color. And so he started making very large works, as large as that screen. And I would like you to take a look at one of his images. And they're very profound. Just by the way, one of them just sold, one that's very much like this just sold for $36 million in auction. So he is an icon of modernism, and really was able to connect with the viewer on something that was greater than an image itself, and that's color. So I'm going to turn out the lights now and have you have a look at this image and see what you get out of it.
Yeah.
So if we didn't have any more research, I respond very emotionally. It evokes a mood in me. Did anybody else feel the same way? Anybody get a sense of an emotional feeling about it? And if we had no research at all, this would be a perfect reason, a perfect example of why color provokes emotion, why people respond to color. And the second part of it is there is no imagery in this painting. So we don't need imagery. We don't need something representational to evoke an emotion or a mood. All you really need is the color. So Rothko proved that to us, and these are really amazing paintings. There's another side to this. So our brain not only processes color, but it also processes something called, I'm going to call it value. All of the students in the studio art program know exactly what I'm talking about when I say value, but for those of you that haven't had one of those classes, Value is how dark or light something is. So we have white at a 1 and black at a 10. And an image is composed, if it's done well, with a series of values, shapes between dark and light. This is a black and white version of a painting by J.M.W. Turner. And I wanted to show it to you and just see if you feel you get the same feeling that you got when you looked at the color image. Do you get the same feeling from this black and white image that you got from the color image? So I don't, and maybe some of you don't as well. And the reason for that is that darkness and lightness, value, happens in a different part of the brain. It's called the WARE system, okay? And it is a very old part of the brain, and what it does is it communicates to us distance, space, and those kinds of issues. More, let's call them more practical issues. You know, is something close to me? Is it far away? So you can see how that would be an earlier kind of application in the brain. So you can see here, just using this as an example, the dark shapes in the front. We know when something is darker and we're looking at space that it's closer to us because veils of atmosphere progress to make things lighter in the background. So we know, because we live in the world, that something that is darker is closer to us, okay? So that is the WARE system. It has a different use. I don't privilege it above color, but color has a different use. Here's the same image in color, very little color. It's a totally different feeling, right? And the word feeling, I think, is very appropriate. So we know that color equals an emotional connection, but how does that happen? Well, we used to think, well, I don't think we really knew. We thought color happens somewhere in our eyes or in the optic system, and it does, okay, partially. But just a little bit of backstory on how we make color. If you don't have any light in the room, you won't see color. You only see color when there is light. Why? And the more light you have, the more color you'll see. Why? Because light is composed of color. So Sir Isaac Newton did an experiment and found out we have the white light and it refracts into the rainbow, and that was a huge aha. So we found out there's a visible spectrum. And so an object doesn't really contain the color comes from the light, and that's why you can't really see color without light. So certain objects will pick up certain wavelengths of light and make them green or blue. But here's how it really works. As I said, there's been a lot of work that's been going on in the neuroscience community, and how it works is color is now, we know it is made in the brain, and there's several levels of processing. So these little cones you have they're actually in your brain. They actually remind me of little printer cartridges that combine, but they pick up certain wavelengths and they say, okay, this is green. They mix it together. It's beautiful. This is way before we had printer cartridges or computers. So, but the big thing that they've learned is that color, our response to color is variable. It's relative. It's about the sum total of your experiences, okay? So, what I told you the first part, what happens is the emotion is created in the brain when you see color. It activates an emotion, but that emotion is described by, or it manifests by a couple of things. One, experiences. For instance, blue sky at night or during the day has a certain feeling. We kind of know blue has a feeling, has a meaning, quote unquote, of this or that. Green grass that's healthy has a feeling of healthiness and vibrancy and growing. So there are things in the natural world that if we live in that natural world, those colors will mean something to us. If we live in the Sahara Desert, it might mean something different, okay? So the experiences that we have, and those are physical experiences, the memories we have, what do we remember, about a certain color? Do we associate positively with it, negatively? And then, of course, our culture. And as you look around the world, there are very different, I'll just take a wedding. A wedding dress in India is very different from a wedding dress in China, is very different from a wedding dress in the US. So it depends on your culture, so you have a response to green. Now, some of us, because of the natural world, might have some similar responses. So you can't say categorically, green means this. We can get some general ideas. There was a person, his name was Joseph Albers, and he started in the Bauhaus School, and he also was a professor at Yale, and he really changed a lot about the way we see color. This was in the 60s, but it's just being published now, and it is available. It's called The Interaction of Color. It's on a nice little iPad app. There are all these exercises you can do that are about perception. But what he realized was that color perception is relative. So color, you can't say this color has these chromatic qualities. This color is a little bit on the yellow side or it's a little on the blue side. It all depends on what's around it. So as I look at those two, I wasn't sure how this would work on the monitor. Let's see if it is. I think so. Do you see two different squares in the middle? Okay, they're the same color. Okay, the reason we see them as differently is because of what surrounds it. And if you want to learn more about that, Albers is an interesting person to look at, and he was also an artist. So every color is contextual. It depends on what's around it. This is if Albers did he sort of wrote it all down, but this is Claude Monet's view of color. Remember, the Impressionists that was kind of a tipping point in color, because there was all this new science coming out, and the Impressionists ran with it. And a lot of people misunderstand Impressionism. Really what they meant was, I'm taking an impression of that moment in time, okay? And the physical qualities of the light and the color. And that manifests in a lot of different ways through a lot of different artists. But I love what Monet did, and they are pretty pictures, and we have them up on posters, but there's a profound philosophy behind what he was doing. Monet was looking at time. What is the effect of time on color and our world? So you can see each one of these, he spent a decade doing his haystack series. There's a lot of them if you look them up. I just picked a couple of different times a day. And what does this show? The color is not in the object. The color is in the light, and it depends on the time of day. Do we have a pink light at the end of the day? Do we have a bright yellow light? Do we have a white light? What else is around it? The snow that all reflects around. So that is a very interesting learning, and Monet was really on it. So what I want to shift now to is who out there now is using this color and emotional connection, okay? So when you look at images out there in the world, or you create them, you're going to have more of a sense of what is going on now in the world with color, and emotion is the big headline in color. Okay, the entertainment field. This is either the first Disney or one of the first, I think it's the first, Pinocchio in 1940. I was actually surprised how early that was. I thought it was the 50s. And the one on the right, Toy Story, is the first fully animated computer animated film, Toy Story, and that happened in 1995. So a little bit of this is technology. This image was made with cell animation, where there are drawings and they're compiled with cells of, think of like mylar put on top. There were restrictions to that, how vivid you could get the colors. So that's a snapshot of the way it was. And I think, to my eye, this one is a lot closer to what we see in the world around us, where we have atmosphere graying things out, than this one. You know, this one's not too crazy, but the colors are, let's say they're not exactly lifelike, all right? So they're extreme colors. And so that's by Pixar, and you can see when animation gave them the ability to create attention, create emotion. It's eye candy, okay? It really is. So Pixar now, this is from their this is from a blog they have. I think they've elevated the art of taking a story and pairing it with color. And it is ingrained in their process. They have something called people who do color scripting, and they have color scripts, and you can look them up online if you go to this website. But here's what they say. They say it's not about making a single pretty piece of art. The color of the script evolves, and its purpose is to map out the color, lighting, emotion, and moods in the film. They need emotion and moods and pacing of that to sell movies. So that's a new thing. All right. Here's some examples of the color scripts for a couple of movies. They're both pretty bright, and they do start out, by the way, with pastel type drawings to kind of get a feeling of the color because of the vividness that we could get. Of course, it's done, a lot of it is painted digitally, but this is the part of their process. You can see how vivid they are. Think about the Pinocchio piece. Okay, so there is a group at Cornell University. Their latest study that came out in 2012 talks about, they come to some conclusions in looking at things since 1985. They've been tracking all kinds of films. Okay, right now we're just talking in this slide about children's animated films. And every single year, the ante has been upped in saturation. Up. Okay? Here's a good example of Dumbo in 1941, and then Finding Nemo. And I love Dumbo. It's such a great movie. So it's not diminished in any respect in my mind. Dumbo is just a fabulous story. But you can see, if you're trying to keep children's attention for an hour or more, anybody who has children knows about this. There's certain ways to do that, and color evidently is one of them. And it speaks a universal language. It speaks a silent language about communicating a mood or an emotion as much as the script does. Okay, these fun little things are called movie barcodes. Anybody ever seen them? They're fun, right? What they do is they take a film. There's one person that does this. He takes a film, and he's anonymous. You have to send him a note. He has his own list. He takes films, and he compresses each scene, each frame down to 1 pixel. And then he puts them all together into a movie barcode. Barcode's just, a gimmicky name for it. But essentially, in one glance, you can look at a whole movie, and it's very telling, okay? So here is my favorite, Dumbo. And take a look at that versus Finding Nemo, which is only 2003. You can see a big difference. When you look at the Finding Nemo, do you notice, like, if you give somebody, color nonstop and there is no relief, they're going to stop seeing a difference. They're going to stop being excited. But if you put moments of contrast in there, then it's going to mean something, the color. And it's amazing when you look at this color script at the top for how you see that pacing, right? So they rest a little bit, another shot of color. It's a very interesting strategy. Whereas Dumbo, he's the old school way. Just film it and it's great. And you can see the palette in here for Dumbo is less vivid, but also I noticed that the pacing of the intensity of the contrast is a little bit less. So, okay, so they didn't only do that study for children's animated films. They also did children's live action and also live action films that adults watch. And what they learned there is that while the children's films were getting more saturated every year and brighter, meaning more light in them, these films for adults were getting more saturated but darker. So saturated, what saturated means is, saturated means how vivid the color is, how intense, how true to its original color. But you could also, for instance, if you could see what I'm wearing, it's dark, but it's saturated. You can see that it's a blue color, blue-green. So it's a strong color, but it's darker, versus children's, which are light colors, but saturated. So they've also been getting more saturated. So we're living in a world of extreme saturation, is what we're seeing. By the way, this is Wes Anderson. I see smiles around the room when I put this slide up. So great. And also what I do want to say is that the method for talking about color scripting as an opportunity, career opportunity, here there are all over within the film industry color grading specialists. There's special equipment for color grading where you go in working creatively with the director and their vision, and you sort of, in this case, Wes Anderson had everybody in those kinds of colors, but it was amped up to be more than. Video games. Anybody in here play video games? Oh, I knew it. Okay. I don't really play video games. I'm really bad at video games, but I know people who do. So we've talked a lot about video games, and remember I talked about the where system, the values. When we see black and white images, it's about finding our way or seeing how close our goal is or if something's coming towards us. Well, video games operate a little differently than animated films, because animated films are storytelling devices, right? And entertainment and emotion. Video games are very goal-oriented. So it's a little different objective, and color is used differently. So in that discipline. So this is a piece out of Portal, and you can see here the grayed down tones kind of giving us this spatial feeling, and the color is being used to sort of point the way into different places that you could go, different options. But the color bug is getting to all of us. Here's one called Trying To, and color here is being used as a wayfinding device. So, and what they're using here is saturated color. Remember I said it doesn't have to be, it can be saturated, it can be intense, but dark. And also, there's a lot of contrast, dark and light, which is that wayfinding, that where system. So they've nicely combined, I don't know whether the video game's any good, but they've nicely combined color and the emotion of color with their purpose as a game. Okay, illustration. This is one of the world's foremost illustrators. His name's Tomer Honoka. And his work, now remember, so you went from movies and games, which are, you know, it's working in fourth dimension, time, movement, into still images such as painting, illustration, graphic design. So here's an illustrator, he's working in a still image, so he doesn't have the advantage of, you know, moving to the next frame. He's, you know, they've got to get you in one frame. And here's what is so interesting. knowing what you know about color, this is saturated, right? Super saturated, not necessarily real, okay? And, but the thing that he's doing is, if you remember that Finding Nemo image, there was lots of colors in there, right? A lot of different ones. This one, look at how limited the palette is. There's really only probably 2 colors. And then they've reduced, or they've added grays. My color class knows all about this. You know how they did it, but they've added grays. They've grayed things down so it looks a little bit like a different color. The point here is very simple palette, because we got to keep you in this image and have you kind of look around. A lot of contrast, a lot of brightness. It's happening in every field. Okay, there's another thing that's been going on, and that is fluorescent pigments. So sometime in the 60s, Dayglow company developed an uber pigment, and it is amazing. You can see, for context here, how the people in the Dayglow jackets, those safety jackets, which is pretty common to us right now, how they stand out versus the natural world. That's what I want you to notice. And here are the facts that while regular pigments reflect about 90% of the color that's available in light, okay, pigments, fluorescent pigments use a little bit different system, and they reflect 200 to 300% more color than the regular pigments. And this is a little, Margaret Livingstone is a professor at Harvard, and she's written an amazing book, if anybody's interested in it, Vision and the Biology of Seeing. It's written about art, so she's taking a lot of neuroscience. But you can see this shows a white paper, this black line. Look at how white is like the highest you can get, right? I already said that's a 1, black is a 10. So this is as high as you could get in brightness. Look at how high the Dayglow pigments are. Once again, we are exceeding what is it, our quote-unquote perception, or what's out there in the real world. Anybody know this band, Cream? Yeah, that makes me feel good, you know. That was my time. So Cream was the first one to, their album cover for Disraeli Gears was the first one to take those Dayglow that were using, the military was using it, and they took it and they put it on cover art, an album cover art, and that started the whole psychedelic color thing. So that's where it started. Oh, Eric Clapton was in Cream too. All right, so this is an artist named Peter Haley, and Peter was head of Yale School, Graduate School of Art, and an amazing artist, and he's now living in New York, and this is part of his new work. So what Peter, and so I wanted to show you a fine art interpretation of it. After we had Rothko, and now this one. So Peter Haley's work is about technology. It's about the machine. If you can see that from the kind of shapes that he's using and the way he's connecting things. And he's using Dayglow pigments still. He's using them to, it's the perfect, he's not picking it because he wants you to look at his work. He's picking it because he's saying something about technology and how it is more than, and more than what, I'm not sure, but he is making a statement about where we are with technology with the fluorescent pigments. That's an example of someone using it for communication purposes of an idea. Apple markets color. They were onto this. This is actually the color I wanted, but I couldn't afford this computer. I wanted that computer, and I was dreaming because at that time, this was like in the mid-'80s, everybody was saying, you know, what color would you get? It was kind of like something you talked about around the water cooler. But this color, this little, they were on it. And now look what they've done, okay? It's called in marketing mass customization, where how in the world do you give everybody their own product? That was always the challenge. They did it, and this is amazing. Here's my color. right here. I got suckered into it as well. Okay, now we're at a point where color is the product, okay? It's not you're coloring a product, color is the product. So that's where we've come with color. And I just love this. It's kind of corny, but I think I might like something like this. There's lots of companies out here doing this kind of thing with color where they're really marketing color. So I think that in a glance kind of tells you where we are. So I want to talk a little bit, just close now, before we get to some questions with opportunities that we're seeing out there. So because of its strong emotional content, really color is reshaping industries, marketing, the way we communicate products. It's also affecting medicine, science, education. We were talking before the session started, one of our audience members was in education. They were using color in some ways to simplify things. But take a look at this now. I saw this at Barnes & Noble, for medical students, an anatomy coloring book where you're actually coloring to learn the anatomy, which is very complex to learn that. And that's fascinating. So, and it says here, the easiest way to learn human anatomy is with color. So that's pretty cool. I guess I'm not wrong, right? And NASA, from one of their spaceships, look at how they are using color to kind of dimensionalize Mars. So you see, there's many applications of color in science. And this is one of my favorite. It's an image of the brain, a section of the brain. It's called a brainbow. I love that. That's my new favorite word, is brainbow. But that's really happening a lot in science and all kinds of, places where you can use color that weren't there 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Okay, so just to sum up for you, it's also creating career opportunities. So take your color seriously. Example, we just did a little search on Indeed.com, one site, and there were 10,000 plus jobs that required advanced color skills and capabilities. Here's a couple. Some pretty nice companies, So the kind of within visual literacy that we need to have today, color literacy is important for a lot of reasons, but there's a lot of opportunity out there. So I think I'll just open it up to questions from the audience.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for me? Yes.
Where do you stand on the whole Vanta Black issue?
I'm so glad I dropped it out because I didn't want to go over 30 minutes. So I dropped out that slide. Vanta Black is amazing. There is a product. All of a sudden, there's a new extreme product called Vanta Black. It's the blackest black that's ever been created, and it's not a pigment. It's grown with, I'm not sure how, but it's in Wired. So Vanta Black, and there is nothing blacker, and that's interesting to artists, okay, in extreme color. So there is an artist named Anish Kapoor. Some of you may know him. Yes, and he is amazing in his work. He's in all the contemporary museums. And so they said, we can only give this pigment, the company that makes it, to one artist. That's a tough one, right? So they had all kinds of application. They gave it to Anish Kapoor. So that sprung up a whole controversy and actually a Twitter war over from another artist who's in England. His name's Stuart Semple, and he created something called the Pinkest Pink, and anybody can buy the Pinkest Pink except for Anish Kapoor. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes.
This all seems so basic now that we've been over color, since it's such a common thing, I guess, maybe since childhood. What's your favorite color?
The one I'm wearing. Yeah, my group knows that, right? They've actually branded that color for me. Yeah, if you walk into my office, you'll see my colors. My office is painted that color, and I invite all of you to come in and visit and talk about color anytime you want or anything. Anybody else?
I wanted to tell you that I have the turquoise computer, the one that you have on the orange.
You do.
Sitting at home in my office. Everybody walks in and goes, "What is that thing?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's a space computer." And I also think it's so funny, but the color is still just as good.
Is it? Okay. That's I was reading there's a museum of Apple computers, so someday it'll be an antique or a collectible. Hang on to it.
I used to have a 1985 rubber word processor.
Wow.
I'm like, what are these things? Some people want these machines.
They will hold on to them. Anybody else? Yeah, Devin.
Okay, so I know you were talking about like how we view color has to do with our experiences and memories and stuff. Do you think that's how we form our favorite colors?
You know, I was thinking about that because I was afraid somebody might ask me why this is my favorite color. I mean, I have all shades of it, bright blue, green, teal, and everything, but I almost don't want to think about that. I just want to enjoy the fact it's my own, you know. Because I don't really think color is an intellectual process, really. It is more emotional. That's the thing about color. It's part science, and that's why in our color classes we do the science first, and then we work on the other parts of color. But yeah, some things you just like, let's keep the mystery, right? Yeah.
Yeah, follow up on that. Is there any validity to what was popped decades ago, the Lusher color test where you order various, and then that indicates your relative values and interests and so forth. Blue is for tranquility, red is for excitement. If you place black too high, then you come to depression and not very good values. Is there anything that's...
That is such a good question, because there are some things that we could say, like blue tranquility. I lay on the grass and I look up at the blue sky. It is relaxing and I feel tranquil. So I think there is something to those things. Our blood is red, and iron ore is red and fire is red. So there is something that we all share with that. On the other hand, I've looked at that test and I think it's just a little too prescriptive, and we know more now about how we're creating colors. I don't think we can categorize people like that. I think it is very individual, but I think there are ways that we can communicate with color. It's kind of not really, I wouldn't give out that test. Yeah. Yes.
What about, I was curious about what your thoughts were on the rotation of color schemes through decades. So where we repeat what is fashionable, what is applicable towards like vehicles or clothes, even structural paint on the outside or inside of the interior. How is that?
That's such a good question. And I haven't addressed interior design or fashion in here purposely because fashion is kind of fashion, and there are some elements of like trendiness, and part of that industry is what's new, what's hot, what's actually Pantone has colors of the year. We know that, right? And they show up in all kinds of home furnishings, and it's easy to get at Benjamin Moore or wherever. So it's fun. It creates a step change, and there is something that does go on there, like I think it was in 2008, or when we had a real financial downturn, one of those periods, there was a lot of grays around. There's still a lot of gray around, but there was very little color, and it was sort of describing how people felt. They didn't want to see that all the way to bright so much. So I think in fashion, there is a little bit of there's cycling going on for a reason, so I have to get the next color or whatever. But I do think that this trend towards saturation and beyond what we see out in the real world is we are getting used to seeing brighter, richer colors. That's become part of our world, is multicolored. Yeah. Yes?
Why do you think the real estate market is so strongly advising the avoidance of colors, advising a seller, for example, to paint everything white?
Well,
Neutral.
I think it leaves people's imagination. So if you go back to what we said about color can mean something different, this color could mean something totally different for you. That if we paint a color, then someone comes in and they don't have that reaction. They had in a yellow room something going on there that made them mad, that they might react poorly to it. So it sort of gives a blank slate. They know they can paint it, but you can paint it and then repaint it white afterwards. Live with color. Even though my house does, I have to admit, my house does have all white walls, so.
There's a term for that, what he's talking about. It's what color, what should I do to my house to make it appealing to the next person that walks in? Paint it relocation beige.
There you go. Just a little bit of a tinge of something, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah?
I also think that you see like the more moving towards like saturation, even like the animal world. It's just like the brighter birds and stuff. They get the girl birds, and so like the snake that's like red is like danger, and you kind of see like the vibrance and saturation.
You're absolutely, it's an attention getter. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So if color process is happening in the eyes and the brain, how is it that, how does that affect design and outcome if it's all happening in the brain? We don't know, if I don't know the bars on the flag are red until my brain is telling me the bars on the flag are red.
Are you saying how does it get from here to here?
Yeah.
Okay.
How does
Well,
it translate?
I do know, I'm not a psychologist, okay, but I do know that those emotions will create feelings and motivations. So is that what you're asking? Where does the motivation come from?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I think, knowing, if you're in a commercial application, like any of the ones I talked about today, you have a goal. My goal is to depict a tragic situation or something so joyful. I'm going to reach for those colors that are lighter or darker. So I think you have to have, I don't mean to imply that the rules there are no rules. There are some standards and things you can go by. I think that's what you're saying. What do we go by? There are some things that we can go by. But we have to recognize that cultures and people's responses to color are very different. So we just need to be sensitive to that and use good common sense. So there are guidelines, and we study those in our classes too, so we know kind of generally what things mean. Did you have a question, Jessica?
You mentioned how it sometimes seems like everyone has their own personal, individual stance on a color. Do you think that's heavily affected by people's cultural perceptions of how different cultures perceive different colors as different things?
I do, and I think even for instance, like a red wedding dress I've been studying the wedding garb of different cultures in India, and it's not just red, it could be purple or just really brightly colored. That is going to give you a different feeling and about that color. It's going to remind you of different things. The other thing is, in a place like India where textiles are so rich and there's a lot of beautiful color everywhere, maybe a beige. I was looking at store windows and marketplace conditions in India versus England. I mean, the British ones, I love Britain, and there's great design coming out of there, but they are somewhat beige, compared to other places. So there's this exciting palette. So yeah, I think it does affect. Okay, that's it? All right, thank you guys, you're great.